Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and today I want to talk about proactive campaigns. A player in one of my groups had left a comment in one of my previous posts and had suggested that I get a little bit into the campaign structures that I use and sort of how I set expectations. And so I'm probably going to do one or two videos on this topic. This will be my first stab at it. I am doing all these videos off the cuff, so if I meander and don't address the point fully, I'll try to come back to it in the next video. Basically, what I begin with is I set expectations first. So in my campaigns, I don't structure things around scenes. I don't structure them around adventures having a beginning and a middle and an end. I don't structure them around having a sort of pacing or everything meeting a precise challenge level. Like, I don't want every encounter to feel like it's just challenging enough and then the players ultimately succeed over it. What I want is I want the players to feel like they've been transported to another world and that they're there to explore and have fun and engage, and I want exciting things to happen. I'm not sort of, just simulating reality here, but I try to have all the excitement flow through the characters that inhabit the setting, including the players, and the situations that organically develop from that. So when I sit down with the group, one of the first things I'll tell them is that all the things I just told you, that I'm not going to have a beginning and a middle and end to the adventure. Some combats will be easy to beat. Some will be potentially lethal. Some will be certainly lethal. And I think once you establish that you're not scaling the campaign to the party, one of the things they have to do right away is they have to feel situations out. They just can't run in and try to kill everybody. I find that if you're scaling every challenge and every encounter to the party, combat tends to be a first option. Simply because they know that the players know that you're scaling it to them, so they know that you're not giving them something they can't handle, and then if you have, you're gonna maybe go easy or whatever. And so this way they have to be a little bit prudent. I'm not out to kill the party. I'm not a killer GM by any stretch. And in fact, a lot of my NPCs, the last thing they want to do is necessarily kill somebody. But still, even in those scenarios, it can really hamper your day, even if the NPC doesn't want to kill you and they defeat you. So, and with monsters and things like that, it's usually less open to negotiation. So I try to. So by doing that, I find that the players will resort more to other options, and part of making those other options obvious to them is getting into things like the character's background, their skills. That's one of the reasons why I like skill-based games, is I like having some measure of skills. There are obviously a number of ways you can manage this. You can do it simply with attributes in a very basic sort of old school game, and you can still do the same thing. But for me, I tend to like having a robust set of skills, because I can't keep track of everybody, and it's good to know. Okay, Rob has a bunch of points in divination, so he really knows how to see what the will of the gods are in this situation. And Dan, he knows a lot about demons, and so he's going to have more access to information on some of their weak spots and things like that. So just for me, just knowing the skills is important. I also like establishing background material prior to the campaign, so that I know how the player characters are connected to the setting. So if I have a character who's a noble in hiding, I want to make sure I have all the details hashed out, so I know where he, what noble family he belongs to, how closely he might be connected to any important royalty or monarchs or anything like that. And that way, if it comes up in game, if the player decides to go back to his homeland, I'm equipped to manage it. But more important than that, I like having the sort of the roots of the player characters fleshed out and their reason for being together, at least dealt with in some way. I'm not as interested in sort of having a bunch of random characters that have to sort of come together to me it feels a little bit artificial when you have these really separate elements that have to come together because they're player characters, and you go in that direction. I'd much rather just sort of establish, okay, these two guys are brothers, this is their manservant, and this guy is someone they hired to guide them to, something that establishes why these people are traveling together in the first place. It doesn't have to be that way. I've certainly done campaigns where the party gets together in the first adventure. Just for my preferences, I find it easier to sort of get the campaign in motion and have a long-term campaign if there's some of these things established beforehand. And I know some people do prefer having those things develop in the course of the game, and so that's certainly another way to do it. Just for me, I like having some amount of background that roots them into both the setting and the party, and then from there, just basically letting them go wherever they want to go. I don't want to. I will certainly, like sometimes there will be hooks, but for the most part, I really try to leave it up to the player characters to say, well, this is what we're going to try to do, and then I decide what how different NPCs are reacting to that, how the setting is responsive to that, what is feasible, what is not feasible, and so what ultimately generates the adventure, I think, is this interplay between having proactive player characters and proactive non-player characters with connections to other things in the settings and motives that give them fuel. And so you end up with I feel a campaign that's a little bit of sandbox, a little bit of what I call situational adventure, kind of world in motion type thing, and a little bit of drama. I like having some of these dramatic elements in them. I just don't like having them scripted. So, and that's a key distinction. I certainly don't mind a "I am your father" moment. I've had one or two of those in my last two campaigns. They're usually not that particular plot point, but things like that I think are interesting and fun, and they add to the game. But I just don't like them to feel like I don't want the players to feel like I'm scripting a movie, or that that I have this scene sort of thought out in advance. Instead, I might have an NPC who I've decided from the very beginning, because of things the player has told me, this guy is secretly the player's father or something. And then if that NPC decides to reveal that information, he will. But it's not something where I've thought of the and I apologize, my wife is just walking through the room here. That I would I wouldn't have a sort of fully fleshed out scene thought of in my head ahead of time. It would all be sort of naturally flowing within the campaign. And again, that goes for any plot development. It's always about what's the motivation of this NPC, and why are they acting in opposition to the party. Why are they cooking up this wicked scheme? And to me, it just creates a more organic experience. I kind of think of the campaigns more as like a chemical reaction in the setting than as a okay, I've got this clear line that I'm following here. And from the player's side, it does require a slightly more proactive group of players. Not everybody has to be proactive, but you certainly need at least a couple of people in the group that are interested in pushing forward some things. It's also important because like say there's something brewing in the campaign. There's feuding sects. There's a sect war breaking out. You need player characters that are going to say, okay, we got to do something. We got to do this, or we got to get the hell out of here. You want them to have. I like it when player characters have clear, okay, I'm going to go and do this. I don't care what it is. I'm fine letting them go wherever they want. I love it when things happen that I don't anticipate. When I have to suddenly say, oh wow, what would Bronze Master do now that they've done that? Gee, that's really going to upset his plans. How is he going to respond? Those are the sort of things I like to have happen, because I like to be surprised. In fact, in my last Wandering Heroes of Ogregate campaign, I think almost nothing they did met what I was expecting them to do, which turned out for the best, in my opinion. If they had done what I was expecting, maybe things would have been more vanilla. But because they were constantly going against my expectations. I had to really be adaptive and attentive, and I don't know. For me, it produced much more exciting outcomes. So yeah, so that's again, this is just sort of my thoughts on doing a campaign where you're really focusing on having proactive NPCs and proactive PCs, and not really thinking so much in terms of encounters and challenge levels and things like that, or plot points. Now I do make fairly heavy use of things like random encounters, and part of the reason for that is I want the world to feel like it's a real place. So if the players are going to go walking, 40 miles to the north through forest, I'll certainly throw in things on the cuff off the cuff that I think are appropriate and relevant. But a lot of times, what I do is I just ask for survival rolls to see if they can get around anything that's potentially in the area, and then I'll roll in a random table, and these can be anything from a group of priests walking through to a tree demon, and what I like with my random encounters is for them to not all to be about combat. This is sort of a pretty recurring theme for me. I love combat. There's plenty of combat in my games. We have, if you follow my campaign logs, there are characters cleaving through opponents left and right. But it doesn't always have to be that way, and not every encounter has, not everybody who crosses your path is looking to rob you. Even people looking to rob you aren't usually looking to kill you. Do you know what I mean? So I like to when I first start an encounter, the first thing I think of before anything else is, why the hell is this person here? If I roll up, okay, there's a bunch of Yenli priests moving through the area, I think, why are there Yenli priests here in the first place? Now usually my encounter tables are set up so that makes some sort of sense, but sometimes I like to put in nonsensical elements that I have to explain. So I might have to say, oh gee, maybe the nearby general hired them to erect a statue here in order to earn the goodwill of heaven, or something to that effect. And as long as I have some basic reason, then when the players engage them, things make sense, and I can tell right away if the players are interfering with their plans and it's going to get more tense, or if they're potentially could work together towards something. It just allows for a more rich exchange and development in the campaign. And a lot of those little on the fly encounters have turned into major developments in a campaign, just because players went a direction I wasn't expecting. Hopefully I've addressed everything. This is a very big topic, and it's one that I want to tread carefully on, because I want to make sure that when I talk about this, I'm very clear that I'm just talking about what works for me, and I'm not sort of saying people who do things differently than that are doing it wrong. I have my way that I do things. I'm usually pretty adaptive to the group at my table, so like I said in my previous video, if I know a player has some expectations that don't necessarily match how I will typically run a game, I will adapt to them. It just depends on how much that adaptation is going to bother the other players. That's the key thing for me. But I guess my main interest is I want the players to feel like they can attempt whatever it is they think their character would attempt. It doesn't mean they're going to succeed. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to react in the way they expect me to. But I like players being able to sort of say, okay, I'm going to try this, and I like them to be able to just go in whatever direction they want. I will present scenarios. There will occasionally be proactive, like if there's a thing going on in town, someone might come to the PCs and ask for help because they're big heroes, so that makes some sense. But the players don't have to respond, and I don't begrudge them if they don't. Sometimes that can lead to even more interesting development. So for me, it's all about, sort of just seeing how all these things react and adapting to it, and allowing people to go against your, things that you've anticipated. And sometimes it does mean sessions lull, because you're allowing for it. When you allow for that much freedom on the part of the players, things can develop to a point where they sort of, where the action dies down a bit, and you have to kind of figure out, how can we sort of, stimulate this. I don't want it to be, I mean, excitement and fun are still important. So I'm not just gonna let a campaign sort of fade away like a wisp of smoke because I'm trying to push for this level of freedom in the campaign. But I'm going to do it in a way that respects the agency of the player characters. Now, when I think some other important points that I failed to mention, I really think it's important when you run a campaign this way, or at least in my experience, to strive for as much objectivity as you can, and strive for fairness. And when I say fairness, I don't mean equal results for all the characters. I mean treating each player, equally. Like if Rob tries something, I'm going to be as objective about him attempting it as I will for Dan or Greg. I'm not going to let him succeed just because he's the player who always does the cool things. That's I think that's really important. So I like to really be as objective, be as above board as I can, and that goes for my NPCs as well. When the players are fighting against an opponent, I'm not protecting my NPCs. I had a major NPC just die like that, like in a very embarrassing, anticlimactic way. Someone that was a villain for several months in the campaign, and it had been building up naturally, and when they finally met up with her, they paralyzed her and cut her head off, and it was like over in 2 seconds, and then they just trounced everybody else that was in her retinue. And part of that was the way the dice unfolded, part of that was the specifics of how the encounter unfolded. And I'd much rather have events like that in my campaign if it means that I'm being fair and reasonable and impartial. So I could have protected her. I could have said, "Oh, she's got more wounds than you guys thought." I could have done all kinds of things. I didn't want to do that, and I wouldn't have wanted to have buffered it before the event either. Like what had happened was, over the course of the campaign, they had started to exceed her capability. At the start of the campaign, she was very powerful in relation to the players, but she had already sort of plateaued, and she wasn't actively increasing her martial abilities, whereas the players were getting up there. So by the time they faced her, they were just, she was just a much less of a challenge for them. I could have scaled her up, but I didn't want to, because I didn't feel that was an honest way to do things in that particular case. In some cases, they'll meet NPCs that will really strive to improve themselves, and they'll be more of a challenge when they meet. But that's more about the character's motivation and what's driving them. And I think this goes back to what I was saying, where it's not about rigging things to be the perfect challenge for the party. It's not about rigging them to be the perfect dramatic result. It's about focusing on the character aspects of the game, and also focusing on being as honest about the material as you can, and as impartial. So, and I think that's really important. And I know a lot of people will say, well, yeah, but you can't be, true impartiality is never attainable. So therefore you should just, you should not be objective and impartial. And I think, not to get too philosophical here, but I think the idea of having, truth and objectivity as a guidepost is important. It's not about achieving it, it's about striving for it. You see that in any sport where you have referees. Some referees are better better judges of, you know, who played by the rules, and who scored a point, and all the rest, than others. And so nobody's perfect. Nobody has a perfect God view of everything that goes on, but some are better than others, and I think you want to strive to be a better impartial referee than to just sort of throw your hands up in despair and say, well, you know, there's no such thing, so, you know, I'll just do whatever. Maybe that's a little bit of a straw man and unfair to the other side, but just, I don't know. I think impartiality is important. I think it adds to the game, and I think if you're not, you know, I think when a DM isn't striving for it, you can sort of sense it. And so for me, that means, you know, like I said, being as honest about the material as I can. And so that means being honest with myself, being honest with my players, you know, not adding things in because it's convenient for the storyline or whatever, but trying to just be like, well, when I started out, this is what this character was, so I should keep it that way. I mean, and there's a fine line there, because there's always room for sort of editing things to fit what seems more plausible, I suppose. Like you might start out with something that, you know, like maybe you start out, just to use an example, where this character is, in our game we have chi levels, so this character starts out at chi level 5 when you first made her, but then you realized, oh, if I had done that, she wouldn't have been able to have this technique that she was supposed to use, so I'm going to change that to chi level 7 or something. Again, I'd be very reluctant to do that, only if I realized I made a huge mistake would I normally do that, but I think there is a sort of fuzzy line there that it's worth talking about. So hopefully I've addressed points. Hopefully I haven't gotten too off topic. This is one, again, I do these off the cuff, and that means I sometimes meander. So let me know your thoughts. If you disagree with me, I certainly am interested in your point of view. I don't think there's any one right or wrong way to do this. And if you do disagree, I'm not going to respond, not because I don't want to engage the topic, but because I don't want to make people feel like they can't express their opinion in the video. You know, I would just ask that people try to keep things relatively civil. If you can't, you know, I'm not gonna ban you or anything for it, but I just think that these discussions are better if we're more civil with each other. So that's the only real thing that I would ask, especially if you're interacting with other commenters. You know, I don't mind getting scorched by posters, but I'd like people to respect each other in the comments section. So anyways, I will let you go. I do hope to get to this topic again when I can be a little more cogent and thoughtful on it. And if there's any points that you think that I maybe got into, but I didn't expand on them enough, or I talked about way too much, let me know, so that when I do the follow-up video, it'll be good. Now, this video is already getting way too long, so I'll leave it at that, and hopefully I'll have another Wuxia review up for you in the next day or so. All right, goodbye.